Back to our top story, where the impeachment inquiry took a drastic turn yesterday after a top U.S. diplomat delivered what House Democrats described as damning and disturbing testimony. Bill Taylor detailed his account of President Trump's dealings with Ukraine, and he said the president wanted to hold up military aid to Ukraine in exchange for the country's commitment to investigate Democrats and a company linked to Joe Biden's son. The White House called the inquiry a coordinated smear campaign and said that there was no quid pro quo on Ukraine. So Nancy Cordes is on Capitol Hill. Nancy, what else did we learn from Taylor's testimony? I mean, his opening statement alone was quite lengthy.
It was, and it was very detailed. He laid out phone calls and meetings and texts and cables in which this strategy to pressure the Ukrainians was discussed, and where the Ukrainians themselves were told what to say to make President Trump happy. Taylor said he found all of this alarming and made it clear that he does believe that there was a quid pro quo aimed at providing personal gain for the president.
Mr. Taylor, what led you to be concerned about a quid pro quo? In nearly 10 hours of testimony, Ambassador Bill Taylor described a secret campaign to pressure Ukraine, using millions in military aid as leverage.
This is my most disturbing day in Congress so far. Very troubling.
He is probably one of the most credible witnesses I've ever seen.
Taylor is a veteran civil servant who was asked to return to his post in Ukraine this summer. According to his 15-page opening statement, he encountered a highly irregular U.S. policymaking effort there, led by Mr. Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani.
This is not just rogue Rudy Giuliani self-dealing in Ukraine. He's an agent of the president.
Taylor said that by mid-July, it was becoming clear that a meeting the Ukrainian president sought with Mr. Trump was conditioned on the investigation of Burisma, the energy company that employed the son of presidential candidate Joe Biden. Taylor said he was told that everything, including millions of dollars in U.S. security assistance, depended on Zelensky publicly announcing an investigation related to the Bidens and the 2016 election.
The money held up had absolutely nothing to do with Biden.
Taylor's testimony directly contradicted the White House line.
There was no quid pro quo at all.
Mr. Trump isn't making it easy for allies to defend him.
The president has said that you told him that his phone call with the Ukrainian president was perfect and innocent.
We've not had any conversations on that subject.
So he was lying about that?
You'll have to ask him.
Well, that's interesting, Nancy. Taylor's testimony certainly lined up with previous depositions and the whistleblower's complaint suggesting a quid pro quo from the president. You know, some will say there's already an awful lot of evidence. Some would say that just the portion of the transcript that we got from that Ukraine phone call was a lot of evidence. What more do you think Democrats need?
Well, I think
they need?
What they think they need is as much evidence as they can gather during this critical period right now, where they feel that they have the leeway to conduct these lengthy depositions behind closed doors and amass as much evidence as possible that there was an expectation on the president's part that if he withheld some of these things that the Ukrainians wanted, a meeting with him and hundreds of millions of dollars in military aid, that he could extract from them what he wanted, which appeared to be embarrassing his would-be campaign rival. And what we already see is that there are still Republicans, Mark Meadows, who came out of that 10-hour deposition and saying he still doesn't see the evidence of a quid pro quo. So what Democrats are trying to do is sort of amass insurmountable evidence that that did actually take place. And frankly, Taylor filled in a lot of gaps that had existed before now, because the individuals who had been interviewed by the relevant committees were more closely allied with the president. As one Democrat put it yesterday, he seemed to remember details that they forgot. So they have kind of skirted around the edges of some of these meetings, for example, where it was very explicitly laid out what they wanted the Ukrainians to say. But Taylor got much more specific. And so they've got other depositions lined up, and then they want to hold public hearings so that they can convince the public that this impeachment is actually warranted before they would then move to drafting the articles of impeachment and voting on them.
Out of curiosity, did anybody talk about wanting to hear more testimony from Gordon Sondland now that, you know, they've listened to what Taylor had to say? And is there any way that you could get in trouble if you are misleading or lie to, you know, committees like this?
Sure. I mean, we've seen individuals get charged with lying to Congress. Michael Cohen is in jail right now, partly because he lied to Congress, and he wasn't the only one. So that is a concern. I think in Sondland's case, part of the reason that they do want to interview him again is not so much because he lied necessarily, but because he may have omitted certain pieces of information or forgotten, if you will, some exchanges that took place. Now that they have spoken to Taylor and they know his version of what happened, they can go back to Sondland and say, well, he recalls it this way, or he recalls this exchange, do you? And Taylor, Democrats argue, is really an independent arbiter here. He's someone who had no dog in this fight. He had retired, but was asked to come back because the ambassador to Ukraine was suddenly recalled in May, and so they didn't have anyone leading the embassy. He was pulled out of retirement. He was asked to go back, and he says that he landed in the middle of this, as he describes it, very alarming situation. He's somebody who has worked for Democratic and Republican presidents alike, so he is seen as nonpartisan and very, very experienced.
Senator Lindsey Graham says that he's planning on introducing a resolution condemning the impeachment inquiry. First off, what does that even mean? Does that have any teeth? And it certainly sounds like a continuation of what appears to be the Republican strategy of criticizing the process more than criticizing the allegations.
It's definitely more of a messaging strategy designed to get other Senate Republicans who have been somewhat quiet recently because they found it difficult to defend some of the president's actions. It would force them to get on the record defending the president and saying that they think that this impeachment investigation is unfair and that if articles of impeachment are passed by the House, they should be dismissed by the Senate. They shouldn't even be taken up for a trial. But it's kind of a moot point because the Senate's Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, has already said that he believes that it is his constitutional duty to bring these articles up and hold a Senate trial if indeed they do pass in the House, whether he agrees with those articles or not. And he's made it pretty clear that he thinks the current investigation is unfair and that the president's actions don't rise to the level of impeachment.
So let me ask you quickly before you go, Nancy. Rudy Giuliani has come up over and over again in a lot of the testimony. It sort of appears, and certainly it's been suggested, he was kind of operating as a freelance diplomat in Ukraine. Right. I know, you know, the Republicans have spent an awful lot of time criticizing the process and saying that when they look at the evidence thus far, they don't see that the president has done anything wrong. But has anybody expressed to you concern about Rudy Giuliani sort of traipsing around Ukraine with kind of like a shadow foreign policy that he was implementing?
Sure. I mean, even Republicans who have been reluctant to criticize the president feel more comfortable criticizing Giuliani. I think there is a widespread agreement that it was improper for him to be basically operating this, separate channel of diplomacy, as Taylor described it yesterday, highly improper in Taylor's view. And even Republican leaders like Kevin McCarthy have said he's not the lawyer that they would want representing them. So, there is a great deal of relief on the part of some Republicans that Giuliani now appears to have taken a step back from all that, and the fact that White House aides have insisted that he is no longer going to be handling Ukraine policy.
All right. Nancy Cordes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.